We're just assuming that everyone loves this film and knows it back to front and has watched it 30 times.
Honestly, if you haven't, I don't respect you anymore, so get the hell off the live stream.
Hey listeners, just as a heads up, though this will become obvious as you listen, this episode is a cut down version of our live stream YouTube video that we did on Mad Max Fury Road. So if you're interested in seeing the visual components that we're talking about, in particular the script, which incorporates storyboards and concept art alongside the written, well, not just alongside, interwoven into the actual script itself, please check out the YouTube link in the show notes if you're interested. There's also other accompanying visuals. It also includes a half an hour breakdown of the first fight between Furiosa and Mad Max, comparing the script to the actual stage scenes. And we've got that broken out as its own half an hour thing as well. All the links are in the show notes, but we think it's a great episode as it is. So hopefully you do too. Hi, I'm Stu Willis.
And I'm Chas Fisher.
And welcome to Draft Zero Live Solation, a podcast and live stream. I was going to say things that are interesting to screenwriters.
Oh, God.
Where we take a deep dive and try to work out what makes great screenplays work. In this case, we're not just talking about, quote unquote, a screenplay. We're talking about Fury Road and the visual storytelling in Fury Road, which is interesting because we're actually going to look at the screenplay, which is a mixture of storyboards and text. And when we get to it, you'll see. We think it's actually been constructed after the initial story development. And we are joined by Matt Brown, columnist, filmmaker.
Hi, everyone.
Digital product manager and author of the Cinema of Survival, a series of essays on Mad Max Fury Road. We've loved his work, as he loved his podcast and his writing, so he was a great choice to get onto Fury Road when he pumped out a book of how many essays?
It's 12 essays and a foreword, so it's 13 essays. And you know, the worst thing about it was I really thought it would get all the Fury Road out of my system, and it didn't even come close. Like, you know, I've been going through it with my editor for the last few months, and like there are entire categories of ideas that I didn't even address in the book. So someday I'll either write a sequel or I'll just have to like get on as many podcasts as I can to get the rest of it out of me.
So as a whole, we're talking about visual storytelling, but the things that we're going to try and tackle, like the indiscrete things that George Miller and his co-writers have nailed in terms of visual storytelling, are setups and payoffs. We're going to look at eye scanning, deep staging. We're going to look at the wonderful first fight between Max and Furiosa, and finish on how Max and Furiosa's relationship seems to develop entirely through action and very little dialogue at all.
And I want to just point out right at the beginning, thanks to the website Cinephilia, they compiled an incredible amount of material, which was very useful. And I think there was part of the reason I wanted to do Fury Road is there's this idea that Fury Road is in some ways like a silent film. That for George, I mean, we've heard urban myths, and they're not just urban myths, but, you know, this idea that started as storyboards. So it's a development process that's a little bit unusual, but also I think the intention of the film can play without dialogue is really important. And full caveat, and is it a boast? I don't know. I worked with George. I was production supervisor on Happy Feet 2. So they were in pre-production for Fury Road. But I got exposed to a lot of his ways of thinking about filmmaking, and he would edit without sound because he was like, it needs to work. Scenes need to work purely on a visual level. No dialogue, no music. Everything needs to be conveyed. And I think you can see that perfection in Fury Road. And I think the fact that it also spent like 20 years in development is why it's like this finely tuned machine, you know? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's also, it feels like him having that exposure to Happy Feet and the way that animation, storytelling, and quote unquote screenwriting happens sort of hand in glove with storyboarding. So it goes, you know, script, storyboard, animatic, like back and forth a lot. And it's much more iterative. And so you can see, I think that. Should we bring up the script so that people know what we're talking about?
Yeah, because this is wild. I had not seen this before you guys sent it to me because, I mean, when I was writing the book, I was really trying to work with just what ended up on the screen. So I didn't want to look at the script. I didn't want to look at any of the ancillary, like comic books, video games, any of those things. I just was like, what ended up on the screen? So to finally see this thing that, again, like you said, it's almost an urban myth that we've heard this whole movie was not written but was storyboarded out instead. it was really neat to finally see and we don't know if this is really it, but just to see the way this is composed as both a document of images and text is really fascinating.
Yeah, and look, it's certainly a step in the development process. I guess what we don't know is this what they went into production with? And we know, like, the version that we've got here, there's some differences with the final film, but whether this was the kind of document that they were working with throughout, or whether they went to other documents or not, we don't know. But it is fascinating. And in terms of visual storytelling, like, we're just looking at the first page here, you can see how much less writing, like actual words on the page, you have to do when you've got all these images talking for you. Now, there's obviously only so much that spec screenwriters may be able to get away with in terms of this approach. It would certainly be eye-catching and different, but we are going to try and take lessons without, like, even if you're going for the more traditional word-only way of writing a screenplay. But as stated, so many of these shots are just go straight into the movie. And the first way we wanted to get into this topic is how Miller and his co-writers built the world of Fury Road so unapologetically by just throwing all these incredible details at us as viewers without ever bothering to explain them.
Yeah.
So I've got a list of just details that I love that he's bringing in very early on that...
Okay, I'm just going to... I know you're ready to dive into it, and I've got a feeling like we've all got prepared speeches. It's like we're getting each other PowerPoints. I just want to, let's quickly summarize the film.
Yeah, we're just assuming that everyone loves this film and knows it back to front and has watched it 30 times.
Honestly, if you haven't, I don't respect you anymore, so get the hell off the live stream.
It is by my hand! You arise from the ashes of this world!
We are not things! We are not things!
Where is she taking them? I want them back! They're my property!
It's an apocalyptic story set in the furthest reaches of the planet, in a stark desert landscape where humanity is broken. Everyone is crazed fighting for the necessities of life. Within this world exist two rebels on the run who might just be able to restore order. There's Max, a man of action, and a man of few words who seeks peace of mind, following the loss of his wife and child in the aftermath of the chaos, which is interesting that in the official production synopsis they're referencing events of the original Mad Max. And Furiosa, a woman of action and a woman who believes her path to survival may be achieved if she can make it across the desert back to her childhood homeland. So, and we have done a previous podcast on this in our main characters versus protagonist episodes, because as we talked about in that episode, Furiosa in many ways is the protagonist of this film, even if Mad Max himself is the titular character. Something else I want to quickly bring up, because this ties into the world building, and it's something we've banged on our Watchmen, our criminally underseen 3-hour epic.
Criminally. Great episode.
Criminally underseen episode of the live stream, which is on given circumstances. And what are given circumstances? They're the plot, the facts, the instance, the period, the time and place of the action, and the way of life. The given circumstances are suppositions, products of the imagination. They're what informs the characters. And Matt, you made the observation earlier that what was impressed you about the world building in Fury Road was how much is just shown and is truly just given. Like, the characters live this world and they don't exposit the world to each other because it is their given circumstances. They don't need to explain the intricacies of their religion around Immortan Joe because they know it. And so it makes the audience kind of put those pieces together. And that's part of what I want to explore, how they do that.
It's like in THX 1138 when you see the audience watching the sporting event and you don't see the sporting event and you hear weird sounds and it sounds like it's a giant ping pong match or something like that. But you don't need to see the sporting event because in that world of the future in THX, everyone knows what they're looking at. It would be like us watching baseball. Like, it just makes perfect sense. So they don't need to explain it. I see a lot of the same logic here. Aside from the opening narration, where he does at least acknowledge that there was the oil war and then there was the water war and the world fell apart, there's no explanation of the rules of how this world works. We only see it. We see that Immortan Joe has built this citadel. We see that he has this army of skull-faced people that are all bald and all have, mutant growths on their necks. Like, we see all of that, but nobody explains what a war boy is. No one even explains that war boys are all suicidal zealots. We see it because Slit and Nux do it, 20 minutes later. And that's the strategy throughout. And I just think we were saying before we recorded that it can throw you out of the movie. If that's the kind of thing that will get you hung up, it could throw you out of the movie. But if you're just willing to go with it and sort of willing to invest the story yourself with what you think all of that means and what it says for the characters, it can be very powerful.
Yeah. So I had a somewhat unique viewing experience this time around. I've seen it quite a few times now, and I saw it with my wife, who has seen the movie before, but she is a wonderful life partner for me because she instantly forgets movies, so we can rewatch them as many times as we like, and she's still surprised. So she was asking a ton of questions in the opening part of the movie about the world. She's like, "What, is everyone sick? Is this a nuclear holocaust? What's going on here?" And that demonstrates to me that she was in some way not asking questions that rather than being fully invested in the movie. But that was only in the first sort of 10, 15 minutes rather than, once you got through that opening world building, she just gave up to the relentlessness of it. But one of the things that I would like to focus on, you have a broad choice whether you can be as ballsy as George Miller, and to put this in context, it's the fourth installment of a franchise, right? So he has a lot of given circumstances given to him, certainly in terms of the aesthetic. But there's a lot in this movie that wasn't in any of the previous three, certainly around disease and food control and the statuses and strata of this society. So I just want to pull up two different instances where he's given details to us and how he's chosen to put them in the script. So I'm just going to contrast. I'm going to share the document that we have. And again, full disclosure, it might not be the final document, but it is what we're working with.
I think it's worth pointing out that I think this document is compiled from concept art and storyboards that they've had, and they've added the material, because it sounds like what they did is effectively had multiple storyboard artists working on different sections like an animation, and then they've taken those frames and those concept arts and then interspersed them with the script, which is, I actually think, really effective.
I mean, you can see it's a hugely compelling document, much more compelling than any other screenplay. And it also, here's the first description of the war boys. Several youths, war boys, struggle to keep him down. There is no description of the fact that they all have lumps on them, that they're all incredibly pale, that they're all got shaved heads, that they've all got skull tattoos on their face. He doesn't need to do that because he's got the storyboards here to show us, beyond youths. He doesn't need to say how young they are and all their zealotry and their madness and things like that. So I want to contrast that with later when Immortan Joe, who, again, with his back, we see his scarred, cancerous back, and none of that is explained. Is he ill? Is everyone ill in this world? But when he walks through, he's got a human dairy. And one of the observations we made in our pre-chat, Stu, you actually said that even though there's a lot of heavy lifting being done with the storyboards and the visuals here, the writing that is there is incredibly well done. It's not to take away. It's not that they've just gone, we don't need to write this shit.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. It's really compellingly written. The prose is really good. And that, I always, when I read screenplays, I always think that might be something that writers forget, which is it's more than just making the dialogue sound good and true. That's great. But the way you go about writing the non-dialogue, the prose aspects of the script can help sell the script because you're conveying the tone that way. Right. And this is tonally beautiful as a piece of writing. And
performance. It's actually writing in a lot of the not that one, but we'll see later on. We'll get Chas to find an example of particularly Mad Max's, what his internal motivations and his internal monologue is. They're actually writing that in because that's not easily communicated in storyboards. So I think they're actually using the text to communicate things that aren't being communicated visually, like tone.
Exactly. So the War Boys, barely any description, all done in storyboards. But when he walks through the human dairy, it's described we've got these beautiful visuals here in the storyboards, but the word description is fantastic as well. He passes through the milk shed where fattened women are turning cockroach gruel into milk. A-grade human filtered. Their breast pumps are powered by skinny men chained to exercise bikes. I do not need the storyboards there for that to be fully visualized in my head. And this is one of the few details that George has thrown at us in this world building that seems to not actually have a plot payoff later on. It is purely like, this is women's role in this world. This is wonderfully, it's almost like a body horror thing to get like a visceral reaction from the audience. This is how Immortan Joe sees and treats women. So it is pure world building, but almost every other visual detail that we could talk about, like in terms of the cancers, the cars, the spray paint that the war boys do on their mouths when they're about to do some kind of suicidal activity, the chastity belts, everything else seems to have a plot payoff later on. So that was all I wanted to do. Because, I mean, often when we're starting out scripts, the balancing act in that first act, when you're establishing what the rules of the world are and building your world, whether you're in a present day or in this post-apocalyptic world, is to go, how much detail do we have to give, because we don't have all the visuals and the music and the performances giving it to us. So obviously Miller's got that opportunity here with storyboards to add another layer of world building to us that isn't available just through the words, but it's a constant battle of, I can't write a novel here. I can't write what it smells like, what it feels like, everything else. So it's about those choices, about what details to give. And this screenplay is still being sparing in its details, despite being unapologetically throwing them at you without explaining them.
Yeah. And one of my old film school professors would say that, there's something in a film called an image system. And it's not even fully developed here, but like you say, that the mother's milk doesn't necessarily have a plot payoff later, but it does have a thematic payoff, because the whole movie is obsessed with fluids, right? It's about the control of water. It's about the control of gasoline. It's about the control of Max's blood, literally, and how that fuels parts of the story, which we'll kind of get into later. And then on top of that, he also just layers in breast milk, because he's like, why not? We're here, right? Like, we have all of these other fluids that are literally the economy of this world that Joe has built. So why wouldn't we also have breast milk as be part of that?
So what do you think is the...
So you've muted yourself again.
Yeah.
This is a good strategy. This keeps him quiet.
Are you sure it's me muting it and Chas doesn't have a remote mute button? How I can talk interrupted. What do you think is the image system beyond fluids?
No, I think that is, I think he made a conscious decision to have fluids recur in different ways throughout the story to support pieces of the story that were important. Obviously, I think the most important one is the blood thing with Max, and the fact that he goes from being a completely involuntary blood donor to a completely voluntary blood donor at the end. I think that's very powerful. But he's made 3 films where the most important fluid in the world is gasoline. He's now said we're moving away from gasoline. It still plays a part in the story, but he's moving away from it. Now it's water, because he's made the Happy Feet movies and he's become obsessed with the destruction of the planet by way of, losing control of our water. And so he's just layering all of these images into the story in different ways, and they all kind of move around like fluids. Like the green place has turned into a swamp. It has become a subsumed, muddy environment. If you watch the film on those terms, you see that the concept of liquid, just as an image, liquid, comes back over and over and over again.
And the different colors of liquid. There was an earlier version. I bought the art of Mad Max for this podcast. It was a good justification to get it. I've been wanting it for years. So Immortan Joe was originally going to be painted blue. And part of the trading system was going to be people giving him detergent and paint to make himself continue to be blue. All right, that was going to be part of the economy. So that connects to your fluids thing.
Yeah.
In terms of the early visual setup, Chas, I think there's a few observations we can kind of continue on. One I definitely want to briefly touch on, because it's the kind of thing that I would consider including in supplemental material. So I think this episode is really interesting to come after the episode we just did with Mark on pitch decks and supplementary material that you give with a script, because you could potentially get choose to have little bits of concept art in a script. I think we're getting to that point where that might become It's certainly becoming technically possible in terms of both Final Draft and Fade In now support images, embedded images, and I think you'd probably get away with it. So one of the most important kind of recurring symbols is Morton Joe's fiery steering wheel. That logo we see branded everywhere. They did like 100 and something, no, not 100, maybe 50 different designs, but they're all kind of motifs. But what was important for George, and this is like a directorial thing, but it's good to appreciate the mindset, was that it had to work as a branding and it had to work on the back of vehicles. It had to work like anywhere they can put it. So he wanted kind of like strip it back and simplify it. But that symbol reoccurs everywhere and it brands things. It serves a story purpose. It brands things as a Morton Jones property. And we literally see it as that fiery brand on Max. It's a visual storytelling that's establishing the breadth of the empire of Morton Joe, and his status as a demigod. And of course, I love the fact that it relates to the steering wheel. And then you've got that kind of like spiritual, like, I was going to say it's the shrine to V8s, but it's just the shrine of steering wheels where they go and take it. All the aspects of those religion that we're learning and we only learn it visually is awesome.
Well, in terms of the ultimate payoff, is the final culminating shot of the action sequence of the movie. Is that's his steering wheel, his actual steering wheel flying out of the carnage at the screen. Yeah.
And it is neat that the steering wheel does serve as the brand, does serve as the only real visual clue we have to the ritualistic aspects of the warboy culture that Immortan Joe has apparently built up in the Citadel. Like, these things are connected, but again, George Miller never tells us how they're connected or how these pieces work. We just see them in operation. We see them through Nux. We see, the first time we see Furiosa, we start tight in on the brand on the back of her neck, and then we pull out. We've seen Max get the brand before. We've seen, Nux and Slit literally fighting over their wheel. So there's this weird talismanic aspect to steering wheels in this world, because of course there is. It's a car culture. It's like NASCAR gone crazy. So yeah, and then it literally at the end of this orgy of violence in the final act of the movie, the last thing you see is the steering wheel blacking out the camera, and that's the end of that. And that's the last time you see that.
It signifies the end of the act. It signifies the end of the empire. And I think what is really interesting is how sequence-driven Fury Road is. It's very, like, here's the chunk. And it definitely, to me, again, reminds me of animation of breaking things into reels or sequences and working on that section. And very cleverly uses plot elements to kind of tie them together, like stitch them together so they feel part of a coherent whole.
But also, because the movie is so intense, I think that strategy also really works for giving the audience a break. Right? Like, after the fire tornado scene, if you don't have a fade to black and like a moment of kind of stillness and quiet, I think your entire audience would go crazy. Like, that's the 30-minute movie of the movie, and they've seen a lot of stuff up to that. You need to take a breath there. And it's the same thing with the end when the car is crashed. We've seen this entire experience of the final battle, and then there's just a moment there, and then we have the sequence in the truck with Furiosa getting the blood, and they return to the Citadel. So it's a good way to vary the tones, like, because otherwise it could just be, and you kind of get the sense that Miller would be happy if it was just a non-stop chase from start to finish, but the audience would just be exhausted.
Yeah. So in terms of, we had three details that we had flagged in our pre-discussion about. They felt like throwaway details that Miller doesn't bother to explain. That's just world building that then actually turn into massive plot points later on. One is the John Howard character. He's the head of the oil refinery town, and he's got this enormous cancerous foot that just in what feels like a throwaway shot, someone is like tending to it, like draining it of fluids. Again, more disgusting fluid references. But in the end, it becomes super important for Max to use this guy's dead weight foot to drive a vehicle by itself. One of the most beautiful beats in the whole script is, we see all these people with cancers on them, and none of it is explained, like who is cancerous, who is not. Like, there is definitely a hierarchy. Like, Max's back at the very beginning is tattooed with no lumps, no bumps. The breeding women are selected based on not being sick and being pristine and all that kind of stuff. Even a cut on her leg compromises her value. But then Nux has this speech later on about Larry and Barry before they choke him off, and he's got tattoos on his cancers that are going to choke off his windpipe and kill him. And it gives you insight into why it's quite late into this. It's almost halfway through the movie, but it suddenly explains, oh, this is why young kids in this world are attracted to the war boy life, that they are attracted to the idea of this suicide for an afterlife, that they are easily radicalized because their lifespan has been so shortened. It has to find meaning in it.
3 times the gates were opened to me.
What gates?
I was awaited in Valhalla. They were calling my name. I should be walking with the immortal, no feasting with the heroes of all time.
I'd say it was your manifest destiny not to.
I thought I was being spared for something great. I got to drive a pursuit vehicle. For a while, even Larry and Barry stopped chewing on my windpipe.
Who are Larry and Barry?
My mates. Larry and Barry. If they don't get me, then the night viewers will.
Exactly, and Nux is a character that Nux is my favorite character in the movie, and because he could be such a grotesque character, and when we first meet him, he's a fanatic, and he's very thoughtless. Like, he doesn't seem to have any sort of dimensionality around what he's doing. But I really think that scene, that moment there, where the way he talks about his tumors, that he's given them names, that he's drawn happy faces on them with tattoo ink, that tells you something about this guy, and you realize, like, holy shit, this guy's just a kid. Like, he is a child. He's in an adult male body, but like he's so young and so naive. And from that moment, I can forgive him a lot of the behavior up to then, and enjoy the fact that he becomes a more thoughtful man. And by the end, he's obviously willing to sacrifice himself essentially to save everybody. And he does it without even a moment's hesitation. At the end of the movie, when it's time for someone to stay behind and crash the rig so that the others can escape, he doesn't gnash his teeth or it's the same thing that happens with Max. This thing that was conferred on him in the first act, which is he's going to be a suicide bomber for this cause that isn't really his cause, he then gives voluntarily at the end. Yeah. He's going to become a suicide bomber to save his friends.
Yeah. And you've already mentioned it, but Max's transition from being a blood bag involuntarily to being a voluntary blood bag is, again, one of these visual details that is world building early on, but becomes a hugely important plot and character beat.
And they do something very important with design, which is under his, I guess, lapel, like his military jacket, he's still got the tubes. And so whenever you shoot to a close-up of him, you actually still in that the tube that is connected to him is he's still get. And he could have thrown it away because it's not in him, but he is a scavenger. So he's like,
exactly,
a plastic tube going to be useful. I could use it to siphon gasoline or something. And you don't even question that he's held onto it because it just makes sense. But he could have put it in a pocket. Instead, they've chosen to put it up near his head. So it's just constantly there as a visual indicator. And that's the kind of thing that if you wrote into the script, it's going to be hard to remind the audience that it's there. You're going to have to be like, by the way, he's still got the tube in this shot. Whereas in a storyboard, you know that when you're going to cut to that person that you're going to see it. And we've had the similar script, without going into detail, Chas and I have had that problem. We're having to work out when we remind the audience that the character is, because it's like post-COVID, one of the characters is like a little bit obsessed about wearing their face mask. And it's reminding the audience appropriately that is something that is in the given circumstances of this world, because it's not necessarily something that is, well, it's becoming more commonplace in Melbourne because it's compulsory.
For us, it's a detail about building the world, because 3 years post-COVID, is this strange yet? So we're having to educate the audience as to how people feel about face masks in this fictional world that we're doing. And so we're having to, almost do face mask passes of our script. So it's like, who's in favor, who's against, who's wearing them, who's not, like, how do they feel about them, who has them just in case of emergencies, that kind of thing. And that's the kind of world building challenges that we have that George has gotten around by using storyboards. But I think in the absence of storyboards, he would probably have to write, like, in the absence of storyboards and 3 preceding films, he would probably have to write in a few lines just for the reader.
For sure. It's that question of keeping something alive so that you can use it later, right? Like, you just, like, I finished a draft of a script in the spring, and I did one of those things where there's a a physical object that is going to have a different use at the end of the movie than you think it's for. And I had to come up with ways, like every 20 minutes in the script, to just have it come up again so that the reader was aware this is still there. It's not a surprise for the last 10 minutes of the film. It's been there the whole time. It doesn't do what you think it does. And yeah, the tube is a perfect example of that because it's in every shot of him. It's actually on, I don't mean to get too mythic, it's on his right shoulder. It's the angel on his right shoulder. And then at the end, he's gonna use it to save his friend.
I think you're allowed to get mythic given that...
With this? Yeah.
That is what this is.
Yeah.
Two more things of observation about the world building that I thought was very clever. There's the use of the text. So that's the shot when Immortan Joe comes into the room with his brides and is like, there is the text saying, who killed the world? And then there is, what's her name? Giddy?
Yeah.
We are not things. And incorporating that kind of environmental storytelling, which is a term from video games, into this world. And you can tell, like, because George was, like, made a Mad Max video game and he was really into video games and the narrative aspects to them, that you can see that he's incorporated some of those lessons, right, into how he's kind of set up the world. But I would like to transition into set up some payoffs, because there's one, because we touched on the Night blog, that I actually realized is very clever. And it actually pinged for me later. Again, this is the 2+2 thing, right? That the film presents us one element and then it presents us another element and makes us jump to conclusions, right? Which is in the bog. So what we learn, obviously, is the green place is the bog. But you know what I think is the biggest clue for that? This fact that there's just a single dead tree in this plain. I think that tree serves as setup. So when they go, oh, you must have passed through it. And then they make that reference to the crows, which is just this single panel. And this is such a comic book panel. But it makes us go, oh, fuck, that was the green place. And that is it. And so that is a little bit of exposition from the women, the Vuvellini.
I can't wait for them to see it.
See? Say what?
Home. The green place.
But if you came from the west, you passed it.
The crows. That creepy place with all the crows.
But it's also, there's another great setup beat earlier, because I think it's Nux doesn't even know what a tree is called.
Yeah, he says that thing.
There's high ground just beyond that thing.
He means the tree.
Yeah, tree.
Right? So that supports the idea that they could have driven right. They don't even know what they're looking for, right? I mean, Furiosa obviously does because she was born there, but everyone else wouldn't even necessarily know the green place if they found it. They don't know what a tree is, you know? Like, that's a beautiful little beat to set that up.
Because the visual hierarchy of the Citadel is such that there is green on the Citadel that we as the audience are privileged to see because of the high-angled shots. But because effectively it's a strata system that those on the bottom will never see the top. They've probably never seen the green. And so that idea that it's only the wives that kind of mention the fact that there's green in the Citadel. I mean, I wonder if Furiosa's ever seen it. So that idea that maybe the Citadel is actually their hope and all they have to do is reclaim it doesn't actually occur to them until Max mentions it later on. So you've got that as the setup and payoff. We've talked about the foot. We've talked about the blood bag. Was there any others that we thought were particularly... I mean, the film is full of great little setup and payoff, like the little bit with the knife.
In the gear stick, yeah.
The reason why I picked up the human dairy is it seems to be the only detail that I can think of that really struck me in the world building that didn't have a plot payoff later. So it's the exception rather than the norm.
But it is a world building thing. From my understanding, it's about the commoditization of women. That's kind of
100%. I mean, there is somewhat of a payoff later in that Max, when he comes back covered in other people's blood, in that crow sequence is washing himself with something and he asks what it is and they tell him it's milk because he doesn't even know what it is. But like, it could have been water. It didn't have to be milk. It did. Anyway.
The other one I was thinking of was Furiosa's competence with the sniper rifle. So we actually see her using it to shoot people, and then they have a setup where they're like, oh, there's only 4 bullets or whatever. And then Max takes a couple of shots at, what's his name, the bullet farm guy with the wig of bullets. And he misses, and they got one shot, and then Furiosa comes behind him, and it's that moment of he has to trust her to give him that gun. But it works because we've set up, we know, the audience know that she's a good shot. And we know that they've only got 4 bullets, and therefore he's got no other choice and passes it to her. And of course, she hits. But that's a great little setup and payoff. But it also, what I'm setting up, is that when we talk about how Max and Furiosa's relationship develops. But I want to come back to our previous discussion we had about Max not being the protagonist because he doesn't make the first choice. That's Furiosa. When she very much veers off the road, which is, you observe, Matt, that's like, it is the shot in the storyboards, right?
Yeah, it's exactly the same shot in the storyboards. It's clear. Like, I mean, it's as inciting an incident as you're ever going to get in a movie. She literally turns the plot left with the truck. You know, it's beautifully done. I don't actually agree on the Max not being the protagonist. Furiosa is. I think Furiosa, like you've been saying, activates Max. She basically enables the story to go along, which is not to weaken her as a character because she has all the agency. But yeah, like that moment where she drives off, exactly the same in the storyboard.
Yeah. She turns off the main road. I mean, that's the equivalent of there's a great little video essay looking left, looking right. But okay, look, let's touch on it. I'm happy to touch on it if you disagree with this. That's always fun.
I do, because my main thing about Furiosa, she's actually the only character in the movie that does not undergo a change, doesn't learn anything, doesn't become a different person. She's the same person from the moment we meet her to the end of the film. She has an exact idea of what she wants to do. She knows how she wants to do it. She might change her approach to it at various points, most notably when she literally turns around and goes back the way she came. But she does not have an arc. Whereas Max actually does, right? Max goes through this process of deciding whether or not he's going to trust other people again, and basically put the trauma. It's really interesting. Like, Max's trauma in this movie is not the one we know him for. It's not his son and his wife. It's this other apparent child who is a girl now. It's not his son. There's this little girl that keeps occurring to him over and over again. He's obviously gone through something between the last movie and now that we haven't seen. But he has to reconcile his unwillingness to be around people and basically be like, no, I can help these guys get to where they want to go. So he's got an arc. Nux has an arc. Obviously, the Dag has an arc. Furiosa, on the other hand, is really just, sorry, no pun intended, the engine of all this. She's the thing that drives the entire story both forward and then at the end turns it back and heads it back the other way. Yeah. That's my take on the Furiosa protagonist crisis.
Well, we actually have the same take. We're just using different language, because the point that we were making is that often people say the protagonist of your movie has to have an arc, right? Like in the hero's journey and all these gurus, they're all like, here's your protagonist. And what we were making the point in that episode where we looked at Mad Max specifically is that what they've done is split the character functions. You have Furiosa, who is driving the plot, and you have Max, who is supplying point of view and emotional change, and Nux as well to that extent, right? They have very rare opportunities in the script to actually affect the plot. Even the key thing that Max does, which is go to Furiosa and say, don't drive across the salt, turn around, let's go for the Citadel. He is giving that choice to Furiosa.
Yeah. No, that's what I mean when I say Furiosa has all the agency in the story, and Max and Nux have almost none. Their choices are basically go along with these women or we're going to throw you out of the truck. And rightly so. But like, Furiosa has the entire ability to operate change within the story. And that's what I think, that is why people find her so powerful, because we never see that. We've never seen a female character who has that level of control over the unfolding of the narrative in this kind of film.
Even Ripley, which is the prototype for this kind of character, she also is deprived of agency until later in the film. She's more like Mad Max, right? As in that she tries to quarantine the guys, and then what's his name? Little Ash lets him in and all that stuff. So it is interesting that Furiosa is given so much more of that power. But I think part of what it is, and look, I don't want to get into like it's technical stuff that is only useful in terms of diagnosing stories, is that maybe Max is a little bit more of a protagonist in the middle. She kicks off the story, but he takes over the kind of a little bit more of the second act, particularly at least the first half of the second act, because this is what I mean by activated. He is literally chained to the front, dragged into this fight by Nux, but then he makes the decision to try and escape, which we knew was going to happen, but his decision to try and escape and fight on the back of the vehicle makes him encounter Furiosa. He actually is he's like a wooden clog being thrown into a machine, a sabot, if you will.
Very nice.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm referencing a sabot.
Star Trek 6. That's right.
Yeah, he's a saboteur, and he kind of derails Furiosa's plans a little bit at that point. And that means, that's what I mean by activated, is even if he's necessarily not making the choice that's driving the very story from the beginning, they're still making him do something that then changes the course of her actions. The film would, if he didn't get involved at the beginning of the second act, it probably would have ended up differently. It's possible that they would have died in the canyon if they didn't have him to help, and they certainly possibly would have died in the bog. They needed him, but his activation makes him an active character. But it's just interesting that, and they've obviously also chosen to open the film with him being pursued, etc., etc., so it feels like he's got a little bit of agency. Because if it just opened with him being and you could have, there's a version that opened with Furiosa and Mad Max is just there. They needed to see him get caught.
He's definitely the point of view character, and that's how they set that up. Like, we are experiencing this world much more from Max's perspective than we are from Furiosa's. Like, we have less insight into her and less moments of introspection and viewing it the whole what's happening from her point of view than we do from Max.
I'm just going to let you guys talk about this one now. How does Max and Furiosa, how do they fall in love? This is basically a meet cute, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what they've done is establish a meet cute of two people, both of whom have pressed the shotgun, pulled the shotgun trigger, right? We know that both of these people will not hesitate, not even blink, about blowing limbs or heads off people. Each other, in fact.
What's interesting about the first half of their relationship is it really is not about them learning to trust each other. It's about there are moments that are given to them by the script, by the plot, by the external circumstances that force their individual goals to align. Yeah. Right? Max has a set of goals, Furiosa has a set of goals, and most of what brings them together in the first 5 or 6 beats that we've outlined is their goals actually match up. Yeah. Just accidentally, and then they learn to trust each other. But I think if, the stuff in the canyon wouldn't happen if they were not equally invested in, we got to get the hell away from this crazy guy in the mask. Like, they don't care why each of them is doing it. They just need to both go. Yeah. So their goals are aligned.
And I've written scripts that have this problem, right? The two people that loathe each other and people just don't buy them starting to work together, right? I mean, frankly, Stu and I are somewhat working on this problem. It's not
in our relationship, or
Jesus. Yeah, I was about to say, are you talking about your relationship? That's amazing.
So first of all, 100%, but also in the project that
I like how, by the way, nice beanie to hide your isolation fray, Chas.
Well, people were getting too distracted by it from the previous.
You
can wear no shame. It's pretty good.
Yeah, man, I think you look great.
Thank you. But so Stu and I are dealing with this right now in that the character journey is represented in this relationship of two characters in our script, and we had trouble tracking that. Like, that is the key thing that our first readers have responded to. So what amazes me about this piece of storytelling is that they get two characters who loathe each other, who see each other as mortal threats, and with almost entirely through action beats. None of it is sit down and talk about our backstory and find things that we have in common. There's maybe 3 lines of very potent dialogue in the whole journey, but nearly all of it is, as you say, is decisions, like dramatizable binary decisions. And I just want to talk through the beats that they've done because they also make it work in such quick time as well. So we've had the fight.
So we need to, so your observation, like, the writer's problem is they need to get to this point. I think this is how I think it's screened. They need to get to this point when Max goes to Furiosa. Because that scene ends with Furiosa saying to the brides, you just listen to me, right? She is in control. She is driving anything. She's got a plan, right? That when her plan, she has, and the low point is her low point, not Max's low point. Her low point where she's on the sand, strips it, and that's great visual storytelling. I just didn't pull it out. That shot where she takes her thing off and falls in the sand. I mean, that just kills you. And it's one of the few times they break the center line. Max has to be able to go to her and go, I think we should go back to the Citadel and just race past everyone, which is a fucking batshit insane idea. And she needs to be like, okay. Right? So that's the story moment that they have to do the work to get to, so the audience understands why that decision happens.
And it's not just that story beat, it's also following that is Max as a character who's someone who says in opening VO, I've been reduced to a single instinct to survive, to actually choose at several points along this journey to do things that are counter to his own survival.
Yeah.
He's living for these women. So that's like his journey. So it's like these are both plot and character. This relationship and how it moves Max has both plot and character payoffs, and it's really essential to make the whole thing work.
Yeah. And he says that his sole instinct is to survive, but the reality is we learn as the movie unfolds with the flashbacks to the little girl being killed and the fact that she's haunting him. His actual motivation is to be redeemed for whatever this failure is that he believes that he has. He says it'll be a hard day. He's like, look, I know we might not make it. I know this is a crazy plan. But if we do, we might both earn this thing we both actually need, which is redemption. They begin because they're aligned, because they're both very pragmatic characters. They have specific goals, and they can recognize that even though they don't like each other, they both need to get where they need to go. But they end aligned because they both want to make up for some, in both cases, unknown, ungodly sin in their past.
It'll be a hard day, but I guarantee you that 160 days ride that way. There's nothing but salt. At least that way, you know, we might be able to, together, come across some kind of redemption.
We've seen the fight. The second beat is the negotiation between Max and Furiosa to get the women onto the rig, because Furiosa has a kill switch on the rig. Max can't drive it without her. He instantly agrees to take Furiosa on board so that they can drive away. But as soon as Furiosa says, and the women, Max is like, no, okay, we're going to sit here and we're going to wait and we're going to die all together. I would rather die all together than have these liabilities in the truck with me that people are chasing, right? It's, again, all about survival. And like we've said before, the thing that gets them all in is her offering to get the mask off his face.
Yeah.
Kill switches. I set the sequence myself. This rig goes nowhere without me.
You can get it.
Not without them.
So we wait.
You're relying on the gratitude of a very bad man. You've already damaged one of his wives. How grateful do you think he's gonna be? You're sitting on 2,000 horsepower of nitro-boosted war machine. I'd say you got about a 5-minute head start. You want that thing off your face?
Once he's in the rig, and in me discussing these beats, I'm going to actually spend a lot more time talking about the early ones because there's just so many more of them in the first 7 minutes. The storytellers have made us buy these key character beats so quickly. So he gets in, he's working with the chisel to get the mask off his face, and he's finding all her hidden weapons around the cab. And it's a huge number. It's like 20 weapons that he finds hidden everywhere. And he's got the gun on her or on the brides at all times. He's a threat, but he needs her. So the plot is forcing them to work together. The first choice that he has where things change is they're approaching the canyon. They've got the 3 war parties converging on them. And the trailer starts dragging, right? And that's because Nux has disabled it. And Furiosa says, I will go and check on the trailer. You keep driving. That would put Max... I mean, it's hard to know why he makes this decision. Oh, okay. I'm going to share it because I found it. Dunno, feels like I'm dragging the fuel pod. She turns to him. Take the wheel. Tempting. But why trust her? He says, you say, I'll go. So the point is he doesn't actually know whether to trust her, like letting her leave his sight, or for him, what she could get up to by him leaving the cab. But either way, him choosing to go and fix the problem actually changes her feelings of him.
Yeah.
She can trust him because he is working for the good of the endeavor.
But what's important to show that he doesn't fully trust her, right, is he takes the weapons with them, which is a beat that is echoed when he returns with weapons from blowing up the tank vehicle thing, right?
Yep.
It's a deliberate mirror. And this is what I mean. This is like image systems. This is visual storytelling. In this thing, he takes the bag, scoops it up, puts it on the top. So we know that even though he's volunteering to do that, he doesn't trust them. And when he turns back with guns and starts handing them out, we know he's trusts them. Again, doesn't have to be done with dialogue. And it's very classic dramatist.
Dramaturgy? I don't know.
Yeah, dramaturgy. Let's
so
call
then
that.
minutes later, she's in the canyon doing the deal with whoever the canyon tribe are. And the idea is she was supposed to come alone. So the brides are hiding. Max is hiding in the truck. And that her element of surprise is that Max can drive the truck. So the really big important beat is that she has decided for the good of the endeavor. Again, it's for the plot. It's pure character motivations. But Max going and fixing the trailer and defeating Nux and giving the weapons leads her to tell him the kill switches. She, at that point, gives up all of her usefulness to Max. Max could, at that point, flick all the kill switches, carry on, kill all the brides, carry on driving, and have the war rig and be by himself acting fully in survival, right?
Yeah. And I think in both cases, with Max going to check on the fuel pod and with Furiosa making that decision, it's pure pragmatic calculation on both their parts. The risk of doing it is less than the risk of not doing it. So they're just both willing to make that choice. Even they may not feel 100% about it, but they're like, if I feel 70% about it, I'm going to do it. And you see both of them go through that and just do what they have to do.
Yeah. From there until the swamp, there's a whole lot of wonderful, amazing action set pieces with Immortan Joe. Splendid has her moment. Nux has his moment of...
Or doesn't have his moment.
Yeah.
Mediocre.
Yeah. his poor anti moment. So the film stops tracking Furiosa and Max's relationship until the swamp, where Max just wanders off to go and deal with the bullet farm guy. And it's got that amazing line where she's like,
What if you're not back by the time the engines are cooled?
Well, you keep moving.
what do we do when the engines are cool and if you're not back? And he's just so deadpan, you carry on.
Yeah.
And that is, again, it feels so of Max's character, but it's such a huge shift of, this is no longer about my survival. This is in fact about your survival has become more important than mine. And so that's one of the few moments that actually happens in dialogue. But again, it is a dramatizable choice. They could have had them actually driving off and then him sprinting out of the darkness, for example. The next beat that happens before the final turnaround and that great, amazing car chase back towards the Citadel is that when they find the Vuvolini, they find that there's no good place. Their plan is to drive across the salt, but she offers him a bike and the chance to come with him, but the bike is not contingent on him coming with them.
Yeah, you earned a bike. You get a bike whether you come with us or not. Yeah.
And that is, again, it's the thanks, it's the trust, it's the payment, and it's a choice. And then all Max does with that bike is use it to chase them down to say, this is where we should be going. We should turn around and head back to the Citadel. And then finally, as we've discussed a few times already, is him offering his own blood as a blood bag to Furiosa and him telling her his name at that same point.
Bookends. Yeah, you're ending on a really beautiful point, and I was about to. I was
going to say it bookends their entire relationship because it bookends his journey because of the blood, obviously, which is both the beginning and the end of the film. It just also bookends their relationship because it's basically the first thing she asks him, like, "What do I call you?" And his response says a lot because he says, "Doesn't matter."
Hey, what's your name? What do I call you?
Does it matter?
Which is this magnificently nihilistic, deadpan, nothing fucking matters, so who cares moment. And then at the end, he claims his name and he's willing to share it with her.
Max. My name is Max.
And they exchange bodily fluids. So,
and they exchange bodily fluids. Yeah.
In the back of a car.
Him giving his name to her is as much him acknowledging his own humanity. I have a name. I have redeemed myself enough that I'm prepared to say I have a name, that I am a person. And it's weird. I feel myself tearing up more talking about it than I do in the actual moment when I'm watching it in the film, because of like how potent all the background stuff, all the subtext to these very simple, very binary choice beats are. But we've discussed all of their relationship, and I think I've got maybe 8 beats written here, but that's as simple as it can be to get two mortal enemies to change their complete worldview to help each other survive.
Yeah. And to the point where, as an audience, you know, if they announce tomorrow that there's going to be a Furiosa and Max follow-up, you know, another adventure with these two, we'd all be there in a heartbeat, because this relationship's been kind of perfectly crafted as she that's what, you know, the most amazing thing about all this, not just because I like to throw it in the face of the men's rights activists, but she really did become as iconic a part of this franchise as Max himself, and she did it in one movie.
My character in Ghost Recon Breakpoint, he's got short blonde hair and black face paint across like
nice.
I basically modeled her on Furiosa. To the like, it says something that character is so iconic, because Mad Max has obviously influenced so many video games, like, you know, obviously the Fallout series, but then now Furiosa, just that is so iconic that it's now a cosmetic.
I mean, going back to our world building discussion, they take a beat of that when the sandstorm and the water has washed off that grease for us to show us what it was. You know, it could have been a tattoo, but it's the grease from her car. It's part of her, you know, again, it's a little culture beat that
she puts on her face.
Yeah.
I do want to, two observations, and I'm going to get juvenile, but I did take a photo of this, right? Because I was making the joke about the bodily fluids at the back of the Cadillac. The Cadillacs are mounted one on top of the other. This is the Giga Horse. This is Immortan Joe's vehicle. The Cadillacs are mounted on top of one another. Colin Gibson, who's the production designer, says, and any resemblance to a sex act, much on the Immortan mind, is intended. A lot of the muscle car stuff is about cock, and this is indeed about cock and copulation, so they're meant to look like they're humping at high speed. So
I mean, at least they're honest about it.
Like, this is the thing. You can write that into the script. You can literally describe his vehicle is like, I took the
populating at high speed.
The other one I want to come back to is our observation about mediocre, and we're joking about it, right? Because that whole, I didn't pick up, only on this watch do I pick up that other people say that earlier. The couple of the War Boys saw it when someone tries something and then they die, right? And obviously it's something to do with the religion, which is, I just thought the mediocre was hilarious. The first
I think it's whether you get into Valhalla or not is the idea.
It's a really important part of Nux's journey, because there's this whole thing about everything that Immortan Joe's promising him when he's about to jump on I know the secret trap and I can get this, and he's like, I will personally await you at Valhalla, and then he does the thing and then it just fucks up completely in front of his demigod. And so he went from like, oh my god, Immortan Joe, like early on the setup is Immortan Joe looked at me. No, he didn't look at you. He was just glancing in your direction, right? So how odd, like how rare having interaction with Immortan Joe is. And so how significant it is for that character that he's basically, his god is like, oh, I will personally wait on you if you do this thing. And then he fucks it up. And that is super important. Because how quickly Nux turns against Immortan Joe. It happens in a scene with Riley Keough. And look, I'd probably change religions for Riley Keough as well.
We all would, yeah. But again, to get back to the visual and the kind of the mythic of it, what is it that trips Nux? It's his chain, right? Like he's engaging in this act of servitude to Immortan Joe, but the thing he trips on is his chain. His bondage literally causes him to fail. Like little beats like that, I'm like, George, very good.
That is real. That's great. I didn't even notice that.
But also his self-sacrifice at the end. He says to Riley Keough, witness me. He hasn't given up on the religion. He's changed his deity.
Yeah, exactly. And he still recognizes that there is something important in the heart of what Joe has built as like a false godhood, which is that idea that everyone wants to be seen. Everyone wants to be witnessed. Everyone wants someone to see them for who they really are. That's why Max can volunteer his name for Furiosa a few minutes later. So yeah, when Nux says "witness me" at the end, it's a very earned moment of recalibrating what he said earlier.
To me, it's actually more powerful than Max saying his name.
For me as well, but yeah.
Yeah, I generally get teary when Nux sacrifices himself, because he's got the biggest journey. Like, he's got a bigger journey than Max. Like, he's gone from being like this violent, I mean, he still is, but, you know, he is willing to sacrifice himself to save these people. Like, so, I mean, it's obviously something that is in his mindset. Like, as you say, he's trained to be effectively a kamikaze driver. But there's still something in that he's willing to die for these people, and realizes that their cause is just in a way that Immortan Joe's wasn't. Like, he's becoming, as you say, tripped up by his own bondage. He's beginning to see the promise, the hope. He learns what hope is, I guess. Because I don't think Immortan Joe offers hope. I mean, that's the whole point.
Oh, he definitely doesn't. Immortan Joe has basically weaponized human life, and Nux finds hope.
Yeah. Feels like hope.
Nux's character arc is actually the most Campbellian of any of them, right? He is on a classic romantic hero's journey. He literally leaves home, gets into all kinds of adventures, meets and woos maiden fair, returns home with the life-changing formula. He doesn't make it all the way. He has to die to do it. But, like, if you go through the Campbell beats, Nux basically does all of them.
Yeah. Him and Larry and Barry. We can't forget.
Well, of course, yes. Larry and Barry bring him along, yeah.
Imagine if someone, you would know whether or not they little Larry and Barry action figures.
I wish. There's not even a good Nux action figure. It drives me crazy. You know, like, I'm a big action figure guy. It's like, come on, man. We're the toys.
But that actually, I should do that for New Year's. Like, not New Year's, Halloween. Just get little ping pong boards and paint them on and put little smiley faces, and that's my entire costume.
That's not bad. See, I would take it too far. I would actually need to be, like, you know, stripped to the waist and painted all white and bald, and that's too much. No one wants to see that.
Well, you know, if we're still all in lockdown, then no one will.
Great point. You know what? If there's any Halloween, this is the one to experiment with.
Cool. I actually think we're kind of running on time. Is there any other?
It's a miracle.
This is weird. It's really
stray observations that people like lessons. But you've written a whole bunch of essays, and we've kept really focused. But if you you just throwing in these little like bits of wisdom, like those, like the bondage thing keeping him back. Is there any other kind of examples of visual storytelling like that? Chas and I want to do a whole episode on setup, payoffs, and reversals. And part of the idea is that, you know, a pass of a script is when you add something and then you go and weave in the setup, right? That you sit there and go, we need the club foot. Well, what if this character's got a club, you know, a toxic, mutant, cancerous foot? Oh, well, let's go and add in this beat, right? But those kinds, like, for lack of a better word, the poetic justice, the poetic systems of, like, chipping on the train. Is there any of those other kind of visual systems that you can sit there and go, this is good visual storytelling that they've kind of then reverse engineered into the script? You know, it could be that the Nightbog is one of those. The Crows are one of those. I don't know. I mean, obviously we're not part of the process here, so we can't speak to the process, but we can kind of extrapolate some of what it does.
No, but I mean, I think the one other thing is, you know, we've mentioned it with relation to Nux and with relation to Max, like, but there are characters throughout the movie whose bodies are essentially enslaved or used in one way, and that make a choice to use it in another way. Like, again, to go to the moment where Splendid decides, you know, she's been raped by this man, she's carrying his baby, she's trying to escape, and she makes this decision to put that pregnant baby between his gun and her friends. So she is repurposing her own body in that moment to shield her friends and do something that she considers to be of value. You see characters do that throughout. I think it's like, it's a very, I called it an existentialist Western in my book, because it's like, it's very much about, there is no God, there is no Immortan Joe, there's no higher power. The only thing that matters is what you choose to do at any given moment. And you have these characters throughout who are oppressed, who are suppressed, who make the choice to basically take that oppression and use it for good. And it happens over and over and over with most of the main characters. I think that's what unifies all of them. And, you know, I love it. That's why I think I like the movie as much as I do.
Chas, do you have other stray observations, lessons from?
No, I think, look, I don't know how much of it is a lesson, and more of us just, most of this podcast has just been going, oh my God, look how incredible this film is. And
very much so.
I know people who, you know, friend of the podcast, Julio, on his podcast with Alex, the Contrarians, they often laugh at the love that's given to Mad Max, and they go, this is a perfectly standard action movie. And I'm like, hopefully this 2 hours has shown just how much every frame of this film is so carefully thought out, is so carefully interwoven, does so much more than any other action film.
Yeah, if this is anyone's idea of a standard action movie, I'd like to live in your world. Because that would be, you've seen some great action movies, if that's the case.
I was speaking to my friend Emma about it, and, you know, she didn't respond to the film as much because the dialogue for her was lacking. She's obviously someone that's a little bit attuned to the dialogue, and it does feel like mediocre. Part of it feels so out of place, but it's hard to pick what language they should be using for something like Mad Max, but it definitely, the language feels weirdly stylized, but at the same time not stylized. It's very different from like the first Mad Max. And I haven't rewatched the original and Road Warrior for a while, and the third one, that shall not be named. I haven't seen that since I was a kid. But, you know, it's interesting. It's depending on how the kind of person you are and the kind of watcher you are. If you're someone that connects to characters through dialogue, which is completely legitimate, right? I'm not saying rather than gestures or behavior, this film is going to not work for you in quite the same way. That kind of Max Furiosa relationship isn't going to work. So,
but these are not mutually exclusive. With every one of these beats, they could have had Max and Furiosa both slowly opening up about their past. Like it's just a choice. What to me is impressive is this is so much harder to do without dialogue, and that's why I'm in awe of it from the character relationship perspective.
Same.
All right, are we done?
I think we're done.
I think we're done.
If you guys want more Draft Zero more often, please consider becoming a Patreon. It is because of you guys that we have somehow brought you more Draft Zero more often in the face of a global pandemic. Once again, Matt, as a guest, also is going to pay for this episode at some point.
It's
as
really
a
weird.
Patreon.
Yeah, that's right. Guys, I became a Patreon 2 years ago. I've never looked back. I recommend it to all of your listeners. Please do it.
So that you too might one day become a guest on Draft Zero.
Yeah, you're just working your way down the subscriber list.
Yeah. But special thanks to Uber patrons Matteo, Christopher, Sandra, Jack, and Krob. You guys are amazing. We still have t-shirts. Stu keeps telling me he's working on his extra special t-shirts.
T-Public are doing face masks, so you might be able to do it. Well, what we could do is just get your mo as a face mask so people can have the Princess Bride.
We have very similar facial hair, Stu. I
can't look at that. You got a little bit more there.
I honestly can't tell you apart. Between the accents and the facial hair, I have no idea which is which.
That's fair enough. And thanks for coming on the show, Matt. Where can people find more of your excellent writing?
Or the book?
First of all, it's a pleasure. Second of all, you can find stuff about me at my website, tedrick.com, TEDERICK.com. I'm also Tedrick on Twitter. The book is currently sold out for pre-order, but I have decided to print more copies than was originally intended. So there will be more available around November or December. So keep an eye on my website for how to order that.
You got to get it in time for Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. And guys, I'm just such a huge fan of the work that you do. It was a real pleasure to be here and to talk about this movie. I would have talked about any movie. Like, Speed,
Star Wars.
Fine. Yeah. Oh, well, obviously Star Wars, but any movie, honestly.
Yeah, right. All right. I think we're done then because no one else is
Right.
So if you have said anything, it's too late.
Yeah, you suck.
All right. Thanks again. Oh, wow. Bang on 2:00.
Amazing. Just enough time to roll the credits for Fury Road.
And get us locked out of YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good way to end. Yeah. Your feed has been suspended. All right. Thank you all. And many thanks to all our patrons for supporting us. You guys are amazing, especially Jack, Krob, Christopher, Stuart, no relation, and Sandra. Definitely a relation. Thank you. You guys are awesome.
I hope you all feel like arguing with either Stu or myself
about anything on this episode or anything in general.
And you can find many ways of getting in touch with us at our website at draft-zero.com.
At the website, you'll also find the show notes for this and all our other episodes,
as well as links to support us and spread the word for free via a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Very important for spreading the word.
Or if you think that what we do here is worth $1 or preferably more than $1, then you can also find links to our Patreon page to support us getting these episodes to you quicker. Thanks.
And thanks for listening.
Mad Max. You don't want to make Max mad. Because when Max gets mad, he gets even. American International presents Mad Max, the maximum force of the future.